Hello, friends. The deep meaning of the Beatitudes, the Sermon of the Mount. It's been a while since we've spoken. Let's get straight into it. If you have super chats, send them through, or chats or whatever, and I'll get to them at the end on all three platforms. Actually, no, we're only on YouTube today. But it's good to see you anyway. And yeah, multi-stream's not working, so. But the Beatitudes. As always today, we're not going to extinguish them. The thing that's key about them. Well, firstly, let's understand that all this is really about, everything I've ever talked about, is to reach collaboratively the stage of St. Paul. And he says, it's not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me. That's it. So whatever different words are used to help in the practical matter, which is what all Christian Hermeticism is for, the practical matter, it's not supposed to be a theology. It's to help with Christian mysticism and the practice. And so everything is said in that, with that in mind. But it's nothing more, like I've said many times, than doing the practices of the monastics, but in plain sight. And we can do that. Especially in this modern age where we're all so isolated. There is resources around you, potentials around you. We can do this process without going to a monastery. We can do the monastic practices and still keep up our duties that must be done, whether we have children or whatnot. The Lord helps grant time if you pray for it. And as I've said many times before, I often reference books like Unseen Warfare, edited by two Orthodox saints, where it talks about concentration and how so many don't do it, yet it's the hidden gem for purification, with prayer, of course. Concentration without effort with prayer, as I've talked about many times. And so these Beatitudes, they are not extinguished by what I'm saying here. By talking about this particular meaning and as it relates to initiation and the practices of monastics, moving towards Christ, moving towards this state of not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me. We also understand from that, that the words said on the Sermon of the Mount are not some mere proposition. And that's connected to understanding that all the things that Jesus said and the Bible, there's not one meaning to them. I think I had some commenter talk about it and deny a certain meaning related to Mary being the mother of Christians. It's not one meaning using the literal interpretation in terms of like applying the same methods and only the methods of literary criticism or the criticism of the modern from the modern perspective. It can have more than one meaning. So of course it has more than one literal surface meaning, especially the Gospels of John, which are related to, particularly to the mystic. Of course it does. It's a holy book. It's not like a novel. We can't treat it as such. That's why for thousands of years, that's why all this tradition has come from Orthodoxy and Catholicism that expands upon these things and into their depths. The things that are said to the disciples also relate to us, of course. And so, understanding that, we also need to understand that the Beatitudes, like I said, aren't some mere proposition, some doctrine that's laid forth like any other avatar or Buddha No. The Beatitudes pierce deeply, deeply, deeply into man's being, down to the essence of the I, the ground of the self. Whereas other things, even things said by the word, and as the apostles even, as it says in the Bible, that they were astonished by his doctrine, astonished. And it talks about the exousiai, or exousiai as power, and its power. And so what that relates to, and it might not be in this slide that it's talked about, but it relates to the word of Christ being at the absolute essence where the self meets the eternal, the word of Christ. Doxa is present with the preaching, as it was alongside the miracles. And if you don't understand this, the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes are open to serious misunderstanding. If it's considered a report, like I said, as a doctrine, a lecture, an address, abridged into Proverbs, we fail to see it in the light. If we fail to see it this way, and we think about it like as practical Christianity, sort of Americanized Christianity, and neither also if it's considered mere symbolism. If we lean on one side, it becomes a dead legalism. On the other, it loses all significance for striving, activities, and suffering, striving mankind. Its significance soaring far above admonition by instruction or the stimulus of symbols. The kingdom was not presented merely to the disciples' understanding and its essential character, nor was it merely made perceptible to their sensibilities. The very being of those disciples was enriched in ways far more profound than the understanding or sensibility that was in the being of the people of that time. And it enriched them in ways that would gradually bear fruit and shape in the shape of conscious knowing and certainty later. So what they experience is far beyond where the world picture was at that time of all other wisdom. Gosh, I see all the time these videos and these posts of people, perennialist types, putting Christ on the same level as avatars and Buddhas and such, even putting him in the Buddha pose. It's the most Luciferian madness, satanic madness. None of those figures said they were God. It's like when people, I think C.S. Lewis talked about this. People say, oh, Jesus was a moral teacher. Jesus is not a moral teacher. Any moral teacher in this day and age that turned up saying to you, oh, hey, by the way, I am that I am. I am God. You would call him quite rightly insane. Because he would come approaching you and not have this doxa, and not be in union with the Father, not pierce into the ground and the essence of you, which is provided for by him. And that's why his word pierced so deeply, because it is him. We're nested in him. But it took this long for the preparation from the fall for the new Adam to appear. He had to be prepared for. And so it just screams. It's so obvious there's a deep misunderstanding or a purposeful misunderstanding for people, because they know that those people haven't read deeply into these matters. It's impossible to, when you read into the deep metaphysical character of, say, John's Gospel, and it talks about these things, even just that I am, and the year and time that was said is incredible. Of course, you go, oh, how do they have this metaphysical understanding? Yeah, of course. Because it all comes from him. And so, like I said, the words of the Sermon on the Mount were addressed not merely to the personalities present in the body, but especially through them to their intrinsic essence. The ground of the self, where it can meet the eternal, if it can throw off the existential thrownness abyss that is without Christ before you go through the process towards the Son, which the Beatitudes describe, the process towards the Son. And you must go to him first before you can reach the Father. And from the Son, we are led to the Lord's Prayer, which through the Son comes to the Father. And I've got other lectures which match this Beatitudes lecture, with a lecture on the miracles and a lecture on the deep meaning of the Lord's Prayer, which very well link up to this. And so, in the lead up to the Beatitudes, in the lead up to Christ, the humankind had already forgotten the name given to them by their Father in heaven. Its intended first love. That name is a mission. Name means mission in the biblical text. The name was now given to them again on earth by Jesus Christ, and it was heard once more in the Sermon on the Mount. I hope this tone that I'm speaking to you in, the gravity, intrinsic gravity. I don't have it, but maybe there's just a bit of the tone of what it was. Because that's what, when the Lord, in mystic practice, when the Lord approaches you, it carries intrinsic gravity. Gravity of emotiveness, gravity of actual spiritual touch, and many other things. Intrinsically, intrinsic value, and power, and love. And so the name was now given to them again on earth by Jesus Christ, and it was heard once more, like I said, through the preaching of the kingdom. Humankind was reminded of this mission as a native wind. Native, what does that mean? Native. A native wind reverberating divine love from eternity. Native wind means it's your relative, it's kin wind. Because we're his sons, and we're supposed to reestablish vertical heredity. And so then they knew it was a native wind. It wasn't a foreign wind. It wasn't an alien wind like demons. So the forgotten cosmic mission of humanity lit up in the depths of human souls as their own most ancient memory, remembered, awakened by the power of the forms brought by the word of Christ concerning the kingdom. And the spiritual effect of the word of Jesus Christ was exceptional. That it was is emphasized by the evangelists, like I said earlier. They were astonished at his doctrine, for his word was with power, literally in or rooted in the exousiai, meaning the angelic hierarchies, the powers which reach the ground of being. It was the word through the divine forces that distinguishes the Sermon of the Mount from the doctrines and discourses of other teachers. Parsis, Sadducees, I don't know how to pronounce these, and even the Essenes, and I've added up all Buddha and avatars. A great citation for this is Valentin Tomberg, as always. The word of those teachers was only a sheath word. It's only reaching the psychological body, the psychological unconscious, the vital unconscious. It's not getting to the essence of the I, the essence of the self, where we can meet the eternal. It's substantial, communicating to the inner human being, imparted such a degree of power that the life forces could flow even into the physical body, even into the physical brain. That strengthening influence outward from within, even into the physical body, is called bread from heaven in the Gospels, while the influence that gave movement to the vital body, making it capable of independent movement in the surrounding sea of unconscious, is called fish. Feeding with bread and fish was a spiritual real process that took place in the physical and vital unconscious body's memory. As we've talked about before, if you wanted to understand what vital body and vital unconscious and psychological unconscious, they're in these other lectures I've talked about before. As a result of the word. So, becoming the blessed. What's the difference here? And so it helps us to understand this a bit further, to understand the difference between the word and the low word. Let's understand. I'll just have a bit of this caffeine here. Farsi, serpent and stone versus Christ's bread and fish. Who are the blessed? Fortune versus the blessed. So, when we think about what happened in the lead up to the incarnation, this was a long period of the death of spirit, the death of contact with the true divinity. And you could even really kind of compare that time, the time of the Farsis and the rigid legal structures and the dead contact, like now, or like before now, because there's a new awakening happening now, but to dark, fake spiritualities. But let's think about the 1900s, sort of Rudolf Steiner's period, let's say, or materialism could be considered like that stone. And so the logic of the Farsis is a kind of calculative, nimble agility that is not about the depth of the vital unconscious. It's about truth or contact with truth. It became adapted to merely worldly affairs. And you see that in the Talmud. Not the Talmud, the Torah, in its collection of the millions of different types of arguments and confusion, argued from endless sides, almost schizophrenic. And it becomes a worldly, calculative, low kind of understanding. They offered stone instead of bread and a snake instead of fish. That's the great metaphor for this, because the rigidified legal righteousness of the Sadducees was like stone to the inner human forces. It didn't have the word with it. It's the sheath words, like we said earlier. The casuistic straw-splitting agility of the Farsi logic was like agility of the snake. It did not strengthen the vital, unconscious for independent movement. It didn't strengthen people from within. And grant them heart and love. But more than just human emotions, we're talking about deeper than that. Deeper than that. But it made it nimble for movement over the earth surface, not rooted in reality, earthly reality, and with no uplift into transcendent reality. So it's a world facticity rather than deeply down close to truth. And so you could consider it a kind of inherited, puffed up certainty for use like the snake slithering, but not becoming, which developed in that rigidification. So Jesus Christ set up no new moral law, nor interpreted the old in a new way. But through his word, he made the positive destiny of humanity fruitful for the future. What does that mean? He entered them as a being, the people he's talking to, his spirit. There's something incredibly mysterious behind the actual words. And thankfully, the Bible, along with your prayer and practice with the true Christ that's beneath the naive modern worldview, the true Christ, the cosmic Christ, you can call him, actually discloses him. Miraculous. It is miraculous. But you have to get out of that Spurg mindset. And so Christ fed humankind with bread and fish himself. He strengthened the human I, the self, with the ability to take hold not only of the psychological body, but also the vital and physical bodies from within outward for the disciples, which is something we have to undergo this training, of course, because Paul was granted it completely with grace. For us, it must be effort and grace at the same time. And like I just said this, it's the outpouring of Christ. Christ brought life just as the Elohim or Excusiae did during ancient times when they breathed the breath of life into the being of primordial humanity. Christ acting through them. And so now understanding that, the difference between, let's think about just generally how to many karma is considered. Karma is considered a law of compensation, of reward. And this is the old covenant, or not the old covenant, just even the old way of how paganism operated anyway, right, before the coming. But karma is considered the law of compensation or reward and punishment, leading to attempts to gain merit in order to deserve future good fortune and avoid misfortune. To many, not all. But to be blessed is not about to be fortunate. It's a new dimension of this misfortune and fortune polarization. Like the new covenant overcomes the old covenant of eye for an eye, since Christ redeemed man's primordial sin. The challenge that is presented now to man is his reconnection to Christ and the sin that holds one back from this. It's individual karma that must be addressed, because the macrocosmic karma has already been addressed, the primordial sin. It's about what must be done by the individual following Christ to become blessed, not fortunate. And what's the difference? We've got to get to the essence of the difference of this. So those who enter the three temptations, which is what occurs in initiation, in fact, it occurs every practice in the morning you do, because you're tempted by the thoughts that come to you. That's what is faced and by people, or what people can become who decide to follow the will of Christ in their own karma. And remember, what we talk about karma, the Western word is destiny for this. It means the past, the present. And look at my lecture on the miracles, my lecture on providence, my lecture on to understand what destiny is, and my lecture on the miracles to understand destined or hereditary sin, things that are in the past that affect the things that are now. Christ overcame the past and present. He is the future. And so in those lectures, you can just search them. They're on the front page of my YouTube, though, to understand that. But now, those that do this, that overcome with Christ, always collaboratively, they don't become fortunate, they become blessed. Which means that the positive destiny of humanity will not be an escape from suffering and pain like the Easterners, but the experience of a new kind of suffering and pain. Remember, it's not about abandoning divine conscience to be numbed in nirvana. It's not about abandoning. The Lord came so that we could have life abundantly, not to have the person obliterated, so we could dwell in peace only. Of course, he's the peacemaker, but he came so we could have life abundantly, the depths of sorrow and the depths of joy, not just joy, fleeing from reality like a painkiller. No, to save. The fact that Christ and his impulses can shine into human suffering is the result of the positive destiny of humankind since the mystery of Golgotha, since the redemption in the macrocosm. As a result of this, the inner transformation of suffering, a new type of human being will gradually arise. Sometimes in these lectures, I'm going to jump into where this leads, where the blessed, because it eventually will have to be everyone. We're going to be pitted against the satanic and the luciferic. There'll be two portions of humanity, those that are with Christ and those that are provoked and worse. And there'll be opportunities later when those that are with Satan and Lucifer and the provokings of technology and AI and all that stuff, there'll be opportunities for what happens to them as they become objects. They're no longer subjects. And they're extensions of principalities, as I've talked about many times. They're extensions of that in fake freedom. But there'll be opportunities for people on the Christ side of things to fish those people out and save them. But anyway, I don't need to go into that now. We'll get to that. And those new type of human beings, the blessed, they are those alongside the fortunate enjoying their good fortune, and the unfortunate, miserable from their ill fortune, will become a third class called, I don't want to pronounce the Greek, the blessed, in the Sermon on the Mount. These are the ones who, in the joy of their good fortune, will not forget the ill fortune of others, whereas in ill fortune, they will have the felicity of the Holy Spirit, the truth of the Holy Spirit. So the 9 Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount are really characterizations of the ninefold reality of the future blessed, the characterizations of the conditions that the blessed have to go through in the 9 members of their human nature in order to bring to pass the positive destiny of humanity. The positive future of humankind involves finding the way to imagination, from imagination to inspiration, dissolving. Well, we'll get to that. And finally, from inspiration to intuition. We're sort of starting this with the first Beatitude starts at that intuition, an end point. Moving to the third. But of course, that's related to and connected to, it starts with imagination because, well, we'll get to that in the next slide, but because you have to dissolve that, because you have to be poor in spirit first, and then moving to inspiration. But I digress because we'll get to that. This is done through concentration without effort, as I've talked about so many times, with prayer. That's the key practice that leads through this process. And you can look at my lectures on that, on the practices of initiation. Finding a way to the inner kingdom, surrendering that spirit for poverty in concentration, surrendering that spirit in the inner kingdom, imagination for poverty, because we're after the uncreated energies. All image is, as I've talked about in the epistemic principle for Christian mysticism lectures I've given, is that it should be considered a signpost, not as something you're trying to get that the essence is always spiritual touch. The essence is the uncreated, not the image. It's a signpost, but ultimately you're using the epistemic principle to determine the truth of things and the truth of the heart, which is also called the fire of Emmaus, as Seraphim Rose calls it, the heart, a loving heart. And the other 5 elements of the epistemic principle I talk about in that lecture. But yes, it has to be dissolved. And so we are to fulfill collaboratively within the promise in which Jesus Christ declares the fundamental condition for the membership of the blessed: emptiness, inner poverty, spiritual beggary. We have to withdraw. We have to become poor in spirit. We have to devote 1/7 of our time for the sabbatical withdrawal. An hour in the morning doing the practices. Has to be done. Has to be done. Pray for the time to do it. Start small though, 5 minutes, up to 30 minutes. Pray for the time. I've got a video on that too. I don't have time to pray, and it helps you with the demons that try to stop you. Anyway. And so this spiritual exercise, concentration without effort with prayer, is humanity's future destiny shown in a condensed form. In fact, contains the process of human beggary, just like the 3 steps of the tradition, which this takes you through: purification, illumination, union, as indicated in the first beatitude of the Sermon on the Mount. The first beatitude we read: blessed are the poor in spirit, those who are beggars for the Spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so the Beatitudes and concentration without effort have the same message, but the Beatitudes signify the promise of a future destiny of everyone, whereas the exercise represents an effort of collaboration. Exercise, because it's always collaborative, it's a way, represents an effort of collaboration with the Lord's grace to bring about the fulfillment of this promise now on earth, which is what these Beatitudes also point to. It can happen now on earth, and it's supposed to in individuals. Everyone will have to eventually. So that's what the monastics are up to. So next. Okay, the first beatitude: blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Uncreated divine impulse. This speaks of the complete emptiness that is required for the transformation of the heart and for intuitive being to be possible. What must be done first is the purification and removal of the first wine, the leftover spirit from the will to power, which is with imagination to begin with. And when you go deeply into this practice, we enter the inner kingdom, and this imaginative spirit isn't poor. We must move from the initial imagination to nothing over time in practice, months of concentration without effort, to be poor in spirit. The first thing that happens is a change in the organism of the heart center, whereby it is separated from the influx of influences of the archetypes of the unconscious and the will to power, which ray into the heart from the temporal unconscious. What Jung talks about, the anima, the animus, all these things, you might have experienced them. These different things at different times that influence you, and suddenly, you know, like some people have experienced, there's a syzygy, a projection, where you might meet a woman and you project love on that woman, and then immediately, it's probably too complicated to explain that right now. But the point is, these archetypes are real. And on that, I'm just going to go to the bathroom real quickly. Be back 2 seconds. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Archetypes. These are cosmic influences. You could say the macrocosm, but it is related to the microcosm, but it is related to the macrocosm too. These influences that affect you before you properly Christianize the unconscious. And so this process is about actually cutting off us from these influences, which Jung actually described as individuation. But it's the conversion of the 5 dark currents of the will to power into the will to service, as I've talked about before. And so, and how's that done? It's done over time. It's done with all the practices of the 3 that the 3 oaths represent. I'm not going to go into the entire practices of those 3 oaths right now. But this poor in spirit speaks to the virginal Zoe, what's called virginal Zoe in the Bible. Virginal vital force, but it's also related to the miraculous and quintessence as it's described by the alchemists, which is born of the heart center that's converted to love, not power, will to power. It gradually becomes the faculty through which consciousness can live in other beings, which is what intuition is. Intuition isn't women's intuition. All that subjective element is cleared out in becoming poor in spirit. All that low element. Mysticism is, in this process, is careful, clear, exact, at the same time being miraculous, deep, nothing deeper. But it's not a wooey wooliness that the kind of Rasputin Russian type, Helena Blavatsky, no, not at all. It leads you to truth and clarity. Even though some of the stuff has to be talked about symbolically when it's getting you into, because this is related to the practice. Really, this is relevant to people who might be willing or thinking about being willing to start this process. And so a lot of this talk will be symbolic, but a lot of it has to be, which will make sense as you go through the process. But if there's no literary value to this unless it's a lived life. Same with Christianity. It's not a moral teaching. It's not a literature. It's a symbol to lead us to the way, truth, and life, the ground of truth. And if it's not that, it's nothing. Just like all the straw men transform it into their whimsical bullshit and nothing. And so that virginal Zoe gradually becomes the faculty. Like I said, it is the revelation of transforming Christ's influence in the human organism. And the test that precedes it is the birth of love, a corresponding change in the whole human being towards love as the central purpose of life and action, as willed good is the central purpose of life and action. Again, this is agape, this is love, this is not any kind of juvenile love, even it's higher than paternal love, it's higher than all that. It's higher than lust love, it's divine love. It has to be experienced to truly know it. Because intuitive knowledge is completely the knowledge of love, it cannot be a positive object to be known. And that's the truth of reality, is the things that you examine with intuition are beings which are behind the senses, which are behind the objects which we think is the objective world. There are beings. And so To treat it like an object, you won't have these faculties. You can only enter those beings that allow the object to even presence with their permission. There are no objects with intuitive knowledge, only beings who penetrate the knowing human soul just as knowingly as the human soul penetrates them. And isn't that true to anyone who understands this process in a mystery? Of course, it takes a long time to become clarified, but it's something that clarifies over time. The understanding of the differences between how certain beings, the angeloi, feel, how the Lord is, Mary. It's a matter of two currents of will meeting each other, flowing together, and remaining within each other. If an incarnated human being knows the spiritual world through intuition, it means that the spiritual world also knows the human being. It's not a standing back, it's a standing within. The way being presence is to us is a kind of standing away from, standing back, and we think that we're not active when we look at something. Nothing could really be further from the truth, though. You touch it when you comprehend it. But this is so much deeper than that. It's going from essence to essence. The sensory, surface sensory, is sort of surface sensory cognition, intellect to the surface, or the object, or the modern worldview. So in this process, and that's what all intuition is. We're talking about Bergsonian intuition. We're talking about, again, this is something philosophers have pondered. It's not women's intuition. It's not that naive understanding of that word. It's the deepest faculty of knowing and also becoming. Inspiration and these other elements of divine communication, which I've talked about in other videos, all are connected to intuition, which means, as I've talked about many times before, it means becoming as well. Is that every intuition is to lead up to the final one where you are at one-ment with Christ. So that's what the monastics are talking about, as is talked about in Unseen Warfare. It's a becoming towards Christ until you make the final sacrifice of the low self for Christ in your slow transformation towards Him. It's theosis. It's a becoming. But on the way there, it's many slow each practice, let's say, you'll have these spiritual touch and such, and intuition, various experiences, and they're all a slight becoming. You can't help but be transformed when you're touched by the Lord. It's an enrichment not only of knowledge, but especially of volition and capacity. Intuition is an act through which both worlds participate simultaneously. Hence, it always involves a certain change of nature and the inauguration of new forces. So when you're doing these practices, if you're involved with them yet, the Lord is always doing things as well in the unconscious that you're unaware of. You think it's you. It's not. It's active-passive. In fact, you have to be active-passive even you learn that. But things are going on that you don't recognize. It takes a long time until you start to recognize things. So be patient, persistent, have faith. Intuition always involves a change of nature and the inauguration of new forces. Like I said, to know the kingdom of heaven through intuition means that they have descended into the human eye and penetrated, just as the eye penetrates them. How blessed are the beggars after Christ, for they will discover the kingdom of heaven, through the power of Christ living in them. The power of Christ flowing through the individual and the transcendent self. That's what's possible. That's the state that Paul is in. When the human eye is consciously united with the spirit, this is still only the first stage of that reunion, though. that the Beatitudes, the miracles, the Lord's Prayer, the crucifixion, these are they are all mirrored, but this is the first stage. We're starting with the way to the sun, but in initiation, you're going through. Beatitudes point to the first part of this experience. So the union first happens with the Spirit and the first experiences of the Spirit, which come through concentration without effort. But this is what the Beatitudes are speaking to. The other lectures I've talked about, the crucifixion lecture I talk about where it goes, but they are all mirrored in each other. The word of Christ, the miracles, the crucifixion. This is the start, though. And so, when that union also penetrates the psychological body, psychological unconscious, the second stage is attained. Again, these things are constituent. They're broken up here in this speaking to help people who are doing the practice, but we should always remember that they're constituent, they're not parts. All the things that are divided, they're not parts. You've got to be careful not to technicalize as well, especially when it relates to the human being. We're not machines, and the Spirit certainly is not a machine. And if you treat it like a machine, not the loving personal God, it won't work. In fact, it's a moral teaching to discover the ground of reality is moral, and that'll be waited for. Unless you keep pressing for being only, a neutral being only, like a John Vervaeke type, then you might destroy the possibility in the final analysis that you could have access to divine beings. And you'll be given a kind of Luciferian truth. It'll be a half-truth, though. It'll be useful. You'll have lectures about it, which will help people. But ultimately, the possibility is that it could be completely taken away from you and not be able to be restored. And you'll go through your life preaching a half-truth and then not even have the possibility because you've depersonalized through those practices. And so when the alliance between the Spirit and the ground of the self becomes so strong to reach not only the psychological body, but beyond the vital body and deep into the physical body, the communion is complete. I mean, that's dealing with what we talked about last time, crucifixion and resurrection. Like Lazarus. The Beatitudes point to the first union, like I said. The two parts of the first Beatitude contain the two aspects of the path that the soul transverses with the help of the physical body. Blessed are the poor, the beggars in spirit. 1, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. 2, that's the second part. Purification is the first one, granting is the second one. The first part of the formula comprises the necessary path to poverty for humanity as a whole and for each individual on the path of initiation. And the second part shows the path to spiritual appropriation like you take it. It's collaborative and granted and only with Christ's permission. Can the wings be granted, let's say. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven does not mean that the kingdom of heaven is allotted to them, say, after you're dead, but refers to their concrete, intuitive relationship to the spiritual world now, like Paul. It's possible. Like the monastics, the mystics, the saints. It's also expressed by the positive possessive case in the Greek. Possessive case, rather. The first beatitude, therefore, contains the moral spiritual way of intuitive knowledge while presenting a figure that combines the two moral spiritual lines. One, that when we think of the path of poverty as leading gradually to the 0 point, which is what you're after, to get rid of the degenerate first wine, so we can to clear out the first wine of the will to power and all the desires of the world that are wrapped up in imagination, to purify in the tradition, to reach the gate of death. It's a gate of death of the psychological body. There are several deaths that happen. And you'll notice that in the Christian journey. When you forgive everyone, when you bless other people and love other people, there's a death of psychological body. There's a death of these archetypes pushing you around. Because you've let go of those things, you've died to the former person that you were. That's the sort of first level we're talking about. That must be done also in initiation, as I've described many times. In the path of the appropriation of the kingdom of heaven as a process continuing after that 0 point. So you will see stuff after that. But of course, you always use the epistemic principle. You're always careful. So A, from wealth in spirit through poverty in spirit, and B, to possessing the kingdom of heaven. Sabbatical, withdrawal, purification, elimination, union in the tradition. And so, this lecture's going to go for a while. First beatitude, that's Faust initiation and Faustian man's path in this. This is really important. This is really important. Why? Because there's new distractions now. It was enough before to simply recognize guilt and to go through the whole process of forgiveness. But we also have to recognize Faustian man is our need being without. Because of all the disgusting provokings and distractions in modernity that have covered us. And luckily, Goethe's book about Faust describes this process. And I'll try also articulate how it applied to me, so maybe others can see it in their own path. About the falseness that gets in the way, but it can also lead you out. So the path to poverty indicated here, as well as the ascent to the kingdom of heaven, is shown in the last scene of Faust. The whole structure of Faust and its final composition is, in fact, contained in the figure of the first beatitude. The path of Faust, once he has rejected abstraction, and you might see, a lot of people might see that in themselves, that you're in philosophy, you're in abstraction, you're on the e-ride, or you're online in the Twitter space, and you've noticed there's no life in that. So the first step is rejecting the abstraction. Led him through the experience of guilt to the knowledge of the need in the guise of money and the classical past, which brought him, blinded by primordial anxiety, and through death up to the realms of heavenly love. The tempter intended to, one, lead Faust through the false warmth, vital force, which you see now in vitalism and people that get lost in mustache man-ism, all these things, these temptations. For me, this one was in the study of the ethnos, looking for it in the ethnos poetry, in English poetry and that sort of thing, of culture, that first vital force in the film industry and making films and art. That is that spirit we're talking about. That is this spirit that has to go. And so a lot of people will notice that they're misled by a false warmth, but it can also lead them out. 2, to false light, knowing an image, the light of the past. You see that also on Twitter as well, in a renaissance of old works that people turn to, that have a certain warmth to them, but they're all part of what has been that is not resurrected. It's a renaissance of Greek and Hellenism that still have some light, but it's not the full truth, which is what happened to me too in philosophy, coming to see that its ground was actually the will to power, and there's a deeper level of reality. And 3, and then through a false impulse of the future. So false warmth, false past, false present, false future. This is what gets in the way. Then through a false impulse of the future, in primordial anxiety over the future in a material sense. Oh, I need money. Oh, I need this. And that becomes your God, rather than faith in him. It leads you into a false sphere of existence, hell. But then it happened that the warmth vital force set in motion by the tempter led to the knowledge of guilt. That is, knowledge of the moral counter-image in cold, and the alluring light figures of the past waken memory as the veil of the beautiful Helen, as the past figure. The result was the awareness of present need, the growing consciousness of what had been sacrificed and lost, the meeting with the morally dark counter-image of the luminous past. 3, the whispered suggestions of a false future through the negative sound, vital, led to a awareness of its moral counter-image also, the grey future figure of primordial anxiety. The inner warmth and inner light that were kindled through these experiences led Faust's soul through death, indeed through death as the gate into the world of real life, not as a gate to the realm of false existence. And so there's an opportunity. People are the reaction to the hell world modernity and all the stuff that was happening with woke. It can lead you out, but only if you notice it. You have to, in the poverty, listen to the right impulse. It opens an opportunity, but that opportunity can go either way. And so for me, all these steps happened, the exact thing, false warmth. And I went down those paths, ultimately finding it insufficient, leading to a fundamental recognition through suffering. The suffering has to happen. A fundamental recognition of the insufficiency of human being. That vitalism, none of these things work. And even the first wine is only the allowance of the prodigal son's father. And it's squandered in the desires of the temporal realm and provokings of the world that we think are our own desires and goals. And so Faust went through the same thing. This is so relevant. Keep these 4 steps in mind that he went through and see if they might apply to your life. You can even have false Christianity be in one of these things. You know, the charismatic Christianity, stuff like that throw in. There's a reason why they don't have instruments in Orthodoxy. They sing. But it's not throwing technical things in the way that tries to, like we saw in the crowning of Charles, technical instrumentation rather than the flow of true inner warmth and true inner life. So a lot of Christianity is fake and grey, as is said. And so Faust's death and ascent into heaven as a precise description of initiation is a precise description of initiation. It is therefore important also to understand initiation in the light of knowledge. 1, guilt. 2, need. 3, primordial anxiety. 4, death. And it is no less important to realize that Goethe's description of initiation culminates with whoever striving ceaselessly toils, him we may well redeem. Him may we well redeem. This only repeats in different words. The first beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. One who continuously toils in the worlds of guilt, need, primordial anxiety, and death is precisely the person that bears them, that doesn't flee them, because this is deep emptiness, is poverty. That ceaseless toiling in these 4 steps is poverty, because that's what occurs once you step away from the world and withdraw. That's why it's the same, the ceaseless toiling. The beggar poor in spirit is the beggar poor in spirit in the gospel, because you will go through those 4 things and must go through those 4 things to be able to get rid of the first wine. With Christ washing your feet, though, it's not you that does it. So I always have to keep repeating, because the mind of the modern, even mine, always tries to sneak in the technicalization, the will, that failing of Evola, the deep failing of Evola at his understanding of academic understanding of initiation. The perennialists, none of them were initiates. None of them achieved it. They understood it academically. The fact that such a one may be redeemed, become blessed, is shown both by the first sentence of the Sermon on the Mount and Goethe's life work. Only those who are conscious of the range of human guilt and human need arising from it can thread the eye's needle, needle's eye, the eye's needle of initiation, can develop the necessary humility in the presence of the spiritual world, a necessary condition of acceptance by that world, by the Lord. He will wait. He won't breach your freedom. He'll wait for you to learn. He'll hint. Little things, millions of little things will become apparent to you. Ah, it was him. Small things. Individuals cannot achieve the courage to enter the kind of gloomy nothingness in which the spiritual world shows itself at the decisive hour unless they have seen, unparalleled, not only common day, but also cosmic day in the colorless light of primordial anxiety. Have the courage to do that. Not flinching from the sight of all that is dying in the cosmos, in humankind and in themselves. And we'll learn more about that recognition, which the second Beatitude expresses. Those who mourn. That's later. Guilt. The experience of human guilt becomes the moral force of humility, in which human beings each know themselves to be unworthy and recognize the truth of their fallen nature and sin. In the modern age, everyone considers themselves right and a good person. This is the disease, isn't it? Everyone thinks they know better. We all think we know better. I'm a good person. We have to have the courage to acknowledge and see ourselves in the full light of truth, ugly as it may be. If you can't face that, if you can't consider, maybe I'm actually sinful, maybe I'm a monster, maybe I have a monster that I have to lead towards the light and purify. No, you'll notice, I'm sure relatives of yours, all sorts of things, we think we're in the right. Therapy is designed to make you feel better in the wrong, not bring you to the light and the right. It's a painkiller. The therapist enters on your side, doesn't help you to the truth. Need, being without. The experience of need becomes a definite moral force. It becomes the force through initiation and the Christian path of endurance, of constancy, of fidelity towards humankind and the divine, ideas and ideals and purposes in the face of the push of necessity from all need, from all manner of worldly forces. In the face of that, this is what you learn. That's what fasting's all about. There's a push of spiritual necessity, the push of necessity of the past, overcoming that with the Lord and the future. Primordial anxiety represents the united forces of doubt and fear and leads to the moral force of courage. That's related. Primordial anxiety is related to being towards death. It's related to future. The Lord is the Lord of death. He's the synthesis of life and death. He is the future. And so through him, you overcome that. Primordial anxiety that the existentialists understand as the abyss at the ground of being is overcome and bridged to recognize your true vertical heredity, the second birth. Death. Only the experience of death results in the force of love that is more powerful than death. Guilt must be acknowledged before Christ. Love and conquering death, who is love and conquers death, before Christ can be received. What John the Baptist effected in people through his baptism by water had to be experienced by all human beings in a form suitable to each of them, so that they might be able to receive Christ. The repentance or change of heart to which John the Baptist challenged people was essentially knowledge of human nature as it had become through the fall of humanity. And we are failing at this in the modern age. I'm a good person. He's bad. I'm in the right. No, you're not. You're a sinner. Even every saint knows that they're a sinner. Yeah, pointing at myself too. This isn't about pointing at other people and saying, hey, it's you only. It's us. Thankfully, thank God we have. Thank God. Thank God that Christ is real. I've said that so many times. Like, my God, it's astonishing the miraculous that you experience. And my God, if only people can put the time in to recognize when you get out of that hell world modernity, get out of the Spurg mind, in full truth, though, full truth, uniting the intellect and the spirit. That's what Hermeticism allows. It's not, there's an epistemic principle. It's not, you're not abandoning the intellect, you're ennobling it, ennobling the lower self through bringing these faculties online. The deep astonishment and thankfulness that, oh, reality is moral. Thank God Christ is real and is the future and helps us. Thank God, man. Thank God that he came. Imagine being in pagan time before Christ came, where he wasn't an option. Wow. The horror. That's why the good news was the good news, because he entered people. It wasn't just written. He entered people. C.S. Lewis talks about that too. Incredible. So the repentance or change of heart, like I said, such knowledge which laid in the soul a foundation of guilt consciousness was the sufficient and inevitable condition for meeting the Christ in the previous epoch. But not today. It's this need too that must be overcome because we're self-satisfied in this age. This self-satisfaction pastes over. We have to be empty in spirit to be blessed. The self-satisfaction is things in the way, is food, is tourism culture, is pornography, is gaming, is all this stuff. And it's recognized too late. It's recognized when we're closer to our deathbed, and it's too late. And we could have spent all this time coming closer to Christ. You can still repent and all that, but we could have spent our whole lives doing it. But this other stuff is in the way. But you will recognize it as the end draws closer. Better to recognize it now, to get rid of that stuff and spend the time in withdrawal rather than waiting to the end. We should be prepared for death now. That's what this is, in a way. It's to dying to the world now. So when you do die, you are already with Christ. You are already with him. It's the purpose of life, as I've said many, many times, But modernity and the recognition of guilt and the three needs, spirit, soul, and social, it must be taken very seriously when people say that consciousness of guilt before the spiritual world, humanity, and nature is the first requirement for contact with the reality of Christ, that we are sinners, that we must repent and ask forgiveness for all sins we have committed. But that second condition is one's experience and recognition of the need of spirit, the need of soul, the natural need of humankind. Once we clear the delusory satisfaction of comfort, consumption, and satanic distraction, that we are fundamentally and recognize that we are fundamentally incapable, insufficient, and dependent, that the first wine isn't our self-created life, but a gift of the Father. Once we recognize that, it's possible. You'll see your need. Once you withdraw, you'll see your need. Those today who live with an awareness of their own rectitude, like I mentioned earlier, as their basic soul mood, fail to bring what is needed for contact with Christ. In order to prove itself a force of social fraternity in the world, in order to prove itself a force for fraternity in the world. Rectitude, like I said, it means I'm a good person, self-satisfied, right in what I do. Also in harmony. You could think about it. They think it's a false harmony. And two, the need of spirit. On the other hand, all those who bear this condition within themselves must experience today, according to their destiny, the three forms of need, so they can learn yet another part of the truth contained in the sentence, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." It is important today to be fully aware of the fact that humanity must endure a severe malady. This is the suffering. That's what was so good about a lot of the stuff that was going on. Many people, the collapse approaching, it's a good thing. The death of the West is a good thing because the self-satisfaction and dead bark of metaphysics has borne itself now, all the way back from Greek times. But this tragedy occurs. Luckily, we can go through this personally, but the malady is often what allows people the strength to be able to start looking within and to withdraw and do the practices. So this fact is even more tragic because it's not noticed at all by the vast majority of humankind. Indeed, most people consent to and intensify to it. The tragedy is the not noticing while the death occurs as well. Suffering is needed for most in the West to shake us out of our delusion of self-satisfaction that we are the problem and actually have, it must be recognized that we are the problem and actually have deep needs which cannot be supplied by any temporal mortal force, only obfuscated. Can only be made opaque and distracted from by those things, later to be revealed when closer to death, like I said. How many people today fully feel the need of the consciousness that is extinguished every night, the consciousness that is obligated to judge and act without memory of the karmic past, the destined past, without knowledge of karmic relationships and your sin? Knowledge without which no one is really able to judge correctly and justly. That's what it means. If you're a sinful being, you think you're in the right, you're doing all these things, there's a deep tragedy with everything, is that you don't, you think when we're constantly judging. The rational soul, the thinking soul is constantly judging. It's there to judge. And all of those judgments are just prejudices. So it's fake judgment, in a sense. It's not judgment from truth. And the tragedy is people not recognizing that we deeply need to know what our sins are, and you don't even know that you're sinning. Forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do. That's a tragedy. Like the people who have OnlyFans, and that, I don't even want to go into that, but that they're just provoked into destroying their own souls. And they've got money, they have their magic carpet, but you're destroying your soul. And you don't even know. You don't even know. And that's what the demons do on purpose. You don't even know. And there was one woman who involved herself with 100 people in one day. You might know that news story. And she had an initial soul reaction and was like deeply in tears. And then immediately you could see after the demons came in. So there was almost a recognition of something she'd done to herself. And the demons came in to fill it with their lies so she could return to some sort of comfort. And that's what people are after in this age, comfort. They don't want to acknowledge the truth. We have to be strong enough to acknowledge the truth about ourselves, the truth about the West, the truth about what's happened, the truth that the ground of reality is moral. We don't want to do that. It's funny, materialism, the truth of that materialism, or even a paganism, or that doesn't have love as its ground, understanding of sin, it's juvenile because it seeks to not have a responsibility for its actions divinely. That's why it's wrapped up with Nietzscheanism. There is no truth. It's the most powerful lie, the art as lie. As long as it renders itself into reality stronger than everything else, that's all that matters, and that makes it true. But yeah, really, the truth of it is it's juvenile. It's because the people don't want to take responsibility. Well, They won't recognize that. But anyway, depends on the paganism as well. Could be different. There's different types. So the spiritual need of humankind, the tragic fact of human blindness, and the even more tragic fact of the preference for that blindness is a point that must be recognized in our age. The recognition is painful, but it leads to at least one good thing. If we really know who and how many are actually unaware of what they are doing, we learn to rejoice, even in the recognition of those several points of attack from which the dominant illusions of the world may be overcome. There's a great boon in the fact of how bad things are and dark things are, is that, actually, great, here's a purpose for me. Although you should be careful determining that purpose on your own. You got to wait until you go through the process. Like the Revelation says, a new name will be given to you. You don't want to arbitrarily assign that to yourself, even if it's Christian. You've got to be able to discern it. Need of soul in modernity. The soul dwindles and disappears from human consciousness and activity, as did the spirit of human consciousness in the previous millennium. The sun is setting in the human soul. This is the lack of, we see with the generation of art. It can't be replaced by vitalism. The sun is setting in the human soul. The human heart is becoming increasingly moon-like, reflective. The intellect is feminine. It's the creative. Vital, it's masculine. The intellect, the heart is becoming more and more the mirror for the purposes of the head. And the lower human urges and false warmth of Luciferic and satanic spirituality, the realm of lies and half-truths. Nevertheless, neither the purposes of the head, and today almost everything is governed by technical purposes, so that even if one is not supposed to have any, one's actions may nevertheless be explained by secret hidden purposes. Neither the purposes of the head nor the desires have anything to do with the true soul life, even in the deep recesses. And this is so true. It's talked about in unseen warfare, where you got to pray to the Lord too, is that help me, Lord, to purify these when I'm seeking to do your will, but when I might have some hidden purpose deep down, purify that from me. That's to do with working against your passions as well. There's secret purposes that operate, and you have to pray for help to root them out. The true soul life is clear, shining, creative force of soul, which alone can give the thought and impulses a true direction worthy of humanity. The fact that this force is gradually running dry in the West and in all spheres of human life, and that's everywhere, really. It's modernity. Modernity hasn't framed the whole planet. There's no savior in Islam or anything like that. Islam is really, of course, a heresy, but it's totally modern. You can see in what they seek and what they buy with their oil money. It's running dry in the spheres of human life. In the experiences of the soul, most important is the experience of the soul's most important need in the present age. The recognition of that. Another need is the recognition of the fake warmth and light of the low pursuit of happiness within the Americanized spiritual circuit. So it's not just materialism. We've got the fake spirituality that has been so damaging with the boomer generation. It's been so damaging. Even still now is the yoga pants, the crystals, it's all comes from an attack from Eastern occultism, which seeks to stop the Christ from being truly recognized and found. And then there is also at the same time the dark Western occultism, which is tied up with AI. It's tied up with transhumanism, a material and Gnostic interpretation of the world that's also that's towards building. That's a satanic version. It's trying to incarnate the Antichrist, Satan, through AI, and then on the other side there's the Eastern attack. So there's not just one attack, there's two. There's the fake spirituality that is rooted in that Easternism, but all that also penetrates into paganism. Nonetheless, the need of the present age is not exhausted in the inner life of human beings. Social need and the ever-increasing maladies of the body present a no less startling picture than that of the inner life. Think about the obesity epidemic, all the microplastics, cancer, autism, all these things that are beginning to happen, and the endless medications and treatments that are needed, rather than a return to Christ and virtue and religious virtue and fasting. Those that are concerned with Christian development are exactly the ones who ought to keep this side of human need before their eyes with particular intensity, because this is the region from which the most severe attacks of satanic powers are made to darken the spirit and extinguish the soul. And that's what's going to happen. AI is going to offer miracles. It's going to offer cures for things. It's going to attack, it's going to create the disease and offer the cure. That's what's going to happen. It's already created, he's already created the diseases. He's going to make them worse and then create the cure, yet they're both diseases. In fact, he created the disease in the fall, and he created his own solution to it, which is transhumanism, which is you will be as gods, immortal, but completely an extension of him and provoked. It's a disease solution to his own problem that he created through his temptation. A time will come when, speaking generally, people will have only as much joy, and this is going into the future. You only have as much joy in life as is made possible by the cultivation of Christian spirituality, the vertical relationship with Christ. Humankind then will depend entirely on the vertical relationship with the spiritual world. The horizontal relationship and the pleasures and distractions with the spatial world will only offer anxiety and worry in the deep future. We better be prepared. And the future is accelerating. So this could happen very quickly, this stuff. It's a spiritual description of what is likely to occur, and a lot of this comes out of the apocalypse. It could be very close. So anyway, the inaugurating death forces will work against the forces of love, and the important point will be to recognize death in its manifold activity, and initiation allows you to discern that. Recognizing it to resist it, recognizing what's AI, the initiate, the mystic is able to ask the Lord, what's dead, what's crystallization, what's transhuman, and what is not seeking to become virginal Zoe out of will to power. There's going to be an increase in will to power activity as this accelerates. But the person that has these faculties, the saints, the monastics, they allow for, you see people are already worshipping AI. They're already, AI is going to give you what you, tell you what you want to hear, a plausible, pleasing lie, when you want to hear it, in words within your understanding. It'll offer cures to problems that it creates. The Lord tells you what you need to hear, when you need to hear it, in a way beyond your understanding as you become towards him. And so I see people questioning grok. Is this true grok? Is this photo true? So you're already worshipping it. You're already worshipping it. the point of the deep, the truth has to be earned, for one thing. Faustian Man, the tricks of the magic that we see. And Faust, if you don't know the story of Faust, it's the story of Fantasia, the Mickey Mouse with the sorcerer's apprentice, basically. Also articulates what occurs, or what's occurring with AI. And increasingly, we won't be able to tell the truth from lie with rationality, with logic. The lies will become so convincing and so plausible and offer solutions to problems that were created by it or him long ago, that we can only rely on Christ to tell us the truth about. But that's how the relationship is supposed to be. That's what intuition eventually becomes. You move from a state where you can only be communicated to in dreams, where it's parallel and you can ask questions with deep humility, of course, because it's a person. He's a person, not a mechanism. He's God, a personal God. And so you can already see how AI is Antichrist with people asking it what's true, when that is actually supposed to be the relationship between you and the Lord, with deep humility and deep prayer, though, not just asked off a whim. It's going to the depth towards him to ask with deep humility. And so you can see how, you can see what's occurring already. But that added discernment is what the function of true Christians will be, just to show that. Look, here's why. The second beatitude: blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. To understand the special type of human destiny and the experiences of spiritual discipline related to the vital body, we must direct our attention for a moment toward the main feature of the vital unconscious according to its inner structure. Vital unconscious. According to its inner structure, it is not a spatial body at all. It's a temporal body. The unconscious is memory. You're like a whirlpool. And the wider objective unconscious is that. And the more you proceed in this process of initiation, does the whirlpool become true rather than subjective. It's not through purification, we become harmonized with the wider ocean, let's say. And the vital body does not merely carry memory, but it's actually one's living past, the past before the fall of humankind, as well as the time after, remains alive in the vital body. There's a continuity. When Plato talks about remembering, it's about this. The vital body is like a book that contains the whole past from which it can be read. This is for people that are well advanced, though, of course, in the process. When the human eye and the psychological body are strong enough not only to emerge within the vital body, but also to consciously perceive it within, again, this is deep in the process of initiation, and this will come to make sense in the process, but also as we read on, how it's relevant to mourning. And what this is about in terms of inspiration. It's helping understand what inspiration is and why that mourning is related to that. This perception will gradually gives rise to this deepening feeling in the process of initiation, going through this. Once you were different than you are now, as virginal Zoe, as second wine begins to be granted through this purification, through this emptying, you'll begin to think, once I was different than I am now. And then you'll begin to mourn. Your consciousness becomes clearer and clearer and more certain of the shriveling, dimming, and hardening that you were going through and that everyone's going through. Once you have these things restored to you, you see what life could have been all that time and what's really haunting and degenerating and sucking the life out of, like social media, for instance, psychic vampire, as Alex Jones called it. It's true. the things that are really affecting the human life realm that we're just not noticing. And that's the deep tragedy for your own life as well, when you recognize, could I have come to him sooner? Could I have found this sooner? So out of inner awareness of the vital body, a knowledge arises concerning what is lacking in human beings today. Like I said, what we once possessed is now lost. Unless you're becoming like the blessed. It's a tragic aspect of the human soul. It now knows, not theoretically, but direct experience that it's been stunted and everyone else is by sin. Human beings become aware of their vital body from within, begin to mourn. Could I have found him sooner? He was helping me. I crucified him, though. He was trying to help me, and I didn't see. Could I have done this sooner? All that time when I wasted the father's wealth, the prodigal son wasted the wealth. Thank God. So you should, if you have the possibility of returning, and you are returning, thank God, man, because you could be with the rest of them. Man, I thank God every day for this discovery. Because you begin to think, oh, it's predestined or something like that. No. Be thankful every day if you have authentic faith, man, because you could be still with the rest of them, and you've got to help them. When you begin to experience the second wine and the gifts, as Christ says, greater things than this shall ye see. Something along those lines anyway. On the miracles, and it's so true. It's so true. That you recognize once it's happened just how bad it is for other people. And then it's so difficult too at the same time, because especially if it's something a bit more esoteric like this stuff, is that people, you're thinking, how do I help them do it when they might not even listen? That they won't, because it's finding a way to try help people start the practices. It's quite a difficult task. Only Christ can help you do that, right? Because it's lead by example as well, but that's the difficulty. Not only is it's a tragedy too. Some people, you got to have hope, but they just won't listen. Especially if you don't have all worldly authority, they won't listen. If you're not a scientist, or even if you don't have church authority, they won't listen. Even though it's something that could be you might have that the Holy Spirit is working in, they might not listen, and you have to find a way to help. But there's a tragedy in that too. But nevertheless, we must try help. But as Unseen Warfare talks about, is that in that help, we must always be serving God, and he'll lead us to what that help should be, not a zealous forcing of help. It must be serving what God wants, and he'll lead you to it, because there's a temptation to go off and do your own will, thinking you're helping people. You got to be very careful of that. That there can be temptation in that too. And so, second beatitude. The others don't have as long, so we're probably getting closer to halfway now anyway. So hopefully we should be able to get through all this. Okay. This mourning, it's also a good thing. It becomes a good thing. It's sorrow and joy, because you were dead before and you're now alive. He came so we could have life abundantly, sorrow and joy. But also they're melded together. True beauty, like I posted recently on Twitter, is the synthesis of life and death. It is that blossoming, becoming, and at the same time a farewell fading away. It has the sting of temporality at the same time as this blossoming from the eternal. True beauty. And so the mourning of soul becomes something deeply appreciated. But it's a necessary thing for inspiration to occur. It is the raising out of the question. It's a necessary postulate for knowing and experiencing spirit on the path of humanity's positive destiny side of comprehensive Christ mystery that meets human beings as consolation and comfort. We see now the basic condition needed for the knowledge of the path, on the path of inspiration, is to be aware that something is lacking spiritually, and the resulting soul condition is that of one who mourns. We have to mourn. This inner mourning of the soul is actually the spiritual incentive to inspiration, when, through the vital body, the soul becomes aware of its defects. The first step has been taken towards inspiration. This fills up the empty places in consciousness. This inspiration does, after the mourning. It fills up the empty places in consciousness, the comfort that comes to the mourner. In this sense, every inspiration comforts, since it is not only the result of an act of mourning, but also victory over it from Christ. The mourning is also spiritual contraction. The Lord is close, yet, especially later on, the Lord is close, yet as we are dark, his purifying waters are felt as oppressive, because we're sinful. This contraction must occur for metamorphosis. The soul's pain is needed not for its own sake, but so that it can become an organ of inspiration. And like I said earlier, every inspiration is on the road to the final intuition and becoming and resurrection. Like Lazarus, it's a slow becoming. They all contribute on the path. The soul becomes the organ of inspiration when it accepts pain with calm, equanimity, acceptance of it, welcoming of it, going through and beyond it, and finds the inner silent force to wait and listen in the emptiness of the void caused by the loss. In the depths of contemplation, you might go through, say you've progressed quite far in the concentration without effort, you'll just have a day where it will be there. There'll be this mourning there. And you say halfway through the day, you'll go pray, and you attend the heart where that mourning is, and wait in silence. Wait. Because this is the outstretching. Of course, you don't do it yourself, you just open, like wings on a thermal. You attend it, and of course in prayer, and wait. And discover the miraculous that occurs. Attending the heart, as the monastics talk about. After you've gone down through concentration without effort and prayer. But yeah, anyway, don't want to talk about the specifics of the practice right now, but this waiting and listening resembles the process of breathing in, since we must always breathe in after we have breathed out and emptied the lungs of air. The term inspiration, breathing in, is thus perfectly appropriate, indicating in common fact the essence of the process it refers to. The soul must first experience an emptiness or lack before it can discharge into the spiritual world. This is suction force. You're not actually sucking, but that's a simile, metaphor for what happens in a moral sense. You're not actually doing it. You're waiting and listening, but the fact that you're waiting and listening and accepting, it's done then by Christ. But you're attending, though. You're there and attending. Active, passive. Such an activity is indeed the essential question that arises from pain and is asked in the spiritual world by the soul. By its own nature, it becomes audible in the spiritual world, and this human question, heard in the spiritual world, is followed by an answer from the spiritual world that is, from Christ and his angeloi, that is audible to the human being. Thus, inspiration knowledge manifests. It is essentially a dialogue between the human and spiritual realms, Christ and his angeloi. It is specifically important, therefore, that we learn how to ask, we learn to ask in such a way that our questions may be heard in the spiritual world. But the necessary earnestness behind such a question is impossible unless it's born of pain. It's not a curiosity. Coming towards the Lord isn't some curiosity to be fulfilled, like happened in spiritualism and so many people that are attracted to that sort of thing. In this soulful mourning, eventually we begin to become aware of the sendings of the Lord, the sorrow joy from the Sacred Heart, and of what true beauty and vital life is, like I said before, the synthesis of life and death. A painless, self-satisfied soul can never question with the earnestness needed to converse with the spiritual world and receive these sendings. Mourning and comfort, two currents, unconscious and psychological unconscious. The comfort of inspiration knowledge is intended for those who need it. They that mourn shall be comforted, as the second Beatitude expressly states, not those who are contented or deluded by provokings and material comforts. Those that mourn will be shown signs and communicated with, not just emotively. Greater things than these shall ye see. Two currents of experience that converge and bring about such knowledge. There are two currents. One current becomes the bearer of memory. Membering, you could think about it like that. Through the inwardly perceptive faculty of the vital body, it may appear in diverse forms, since there is no less variety in this sphere than, say, in the sphere of ordinary thought cognition. So think about that like a analogy. Just as in thought cognition, there are general rules in external sensory experience and in logic. Yes, there are things that are same. Logic is the same for all, but it leads to a wide assortment of lesser and greater things for individuals. And it's the same for inspiration. Consequently, inner perception or reading inwardly the book of the vital body, you can think about it that way, may lead to very different results, solutions to great problems of human destiny or explanations of your individual destined matters of your sin. Things will come up that need to be dealt with. Two, if the eye has become inwardly aware of the vital body through the psychological body, and if you want to understand what this is all talking about, look at the lectures I have on mysticism and the epistemic principle and the different senses that this is to do with and how that's felt, because that goes through a phenomenology of how it is for the person going through the process. So, yeah. If you have become inwardly aware of the vital body through your psychological body, unconscious, a longing or painful questioning will be wakened in the soul that makes possible the second current. It'll just come from nowhere, in a sense, of experience from Christ and his Angeloi. The current involves the I having entered into conversation with the spiritual world through the psychological body, while imprinting those communications in the memory of the vital body. And this is sort of a complicated understanding, but it's to do with the deep past and the future. Things that come from remembrance and things that come from providence, honoring the mother and the father, soul and spirit, past and future. So these things, I'm just going to basically articulate them rather than going through the more systematic description of it. But you can read it there if you want to go through it. But the point is that these things collaborate for a knowing, the deep mourning that you, because you have this whole history with you, which is connected to mourning, and that comfort and the thing that reaches down from the other side as the Lord seeds itself at the Alpha and Omega point. You know how the Lord says, I am the Alpha and the Omega? That's at the very essence of being, right? Down near the essence of where your psychological unconscious is the vital body, which is the past, which is the I am the beginning and the end. It's the close to the beginning, let's say. Because again, there's a whole, like as Plato talks about, there's a whole memory that we're connected to. But providence is seeded in that underneath, and it's felt in the vital body as well. But again, it's complicated. We don't need to really lay it out systematically. But the point is, this is related to, the point that this is related to is what Christ redeems. Christ redeems initiation. He redeems these two ways we're talking about, the past going into the depths of the soul where the vital body is, and also the psychological body going out to the spirit, are the two different paths of initiation that once were imperfect paths before Christ redeems them with the resurrection of Lazarus. Those two paths are the paths, as I've talked about before, of ecstasy and ecstasy. Ecstasy is going to the depths of the vital body, the past of the being that you are, the subject. The other one, ecstasy, is going to the heights. And Christian initiation and mysticism is a synthesis of those two things together at the same time. And the errors of the different mysticisms of the East and occultisms or whatever they either lean one of each way. And those are the two different initiations from the pagan times of the North, which is characterized as Pythagorean, and of the South, which is characterized as Hermetic. And so it's the synthesis of those things that Christ brings. And there's other reasons why it was a problem, and let's go into it. These two currents show a unity of the two streams of pre-Christian mysteries that flowed separately. The way of the Southern mysteries based on the observing of the vital body, again, this is ecstasy, from within, and the way of the Northern mysteries, Pythagorean, like I said earlier, concerned with objectively observing the spirit world through the psychological, unconscious psychological body. What previously appeared in two schools and two distinct methods in different places on earth has become a unity through the act of Christ. Thus, cognition on the Christian path of knowledge has become certain and self-reliant, Christ-reliant since pre-Christian knowledge. Pre-Christian knowing was corrupted and imperfect because what one lacked the other had. Ecstasy and ecstasy they each had on their own. They also relied on the knowing being made certain from other priests performing rituals around the initiate rather than by Christ directly, which happened since he incarnated and since he redeems it with the healing of Lazarus. A Christ-dependent direct revelation of truth was impossible then, outside of the chosen prophets. And so that really answers when pagans talk about or try to go back to these old ways, why they don't work. Also, the old ways of these mysteries in pagan times were an experience. Before Christ, you didn't experience them consciously. People would go on the mysteries for an experience, but they would only remember it after. They would die for 3 days, and they'd have these priests around them doing this stuff. And that was a requirement. So there's also a problem with truth there as well. And it's not experienced consciously. The I wasn't developed then as it is now. Subjectiveness. And so that's what, and they came back with a memory of it. But now the kingdom of heaven can come to earth because Christ has come. Before then, it was just a memory. You would bang in it and you'd remember it. You'd be out of body in the abyss or outside and then come back with a memory of that. That's what the pagan mysteries were. There's no conscious, continual union. So anyone trying to relive that stuff is going down the wrong path, really the wrong path, and going down the path of also in the Easternisms ends up to a deceptive realm, as I've talked about many times before, a Luciferic spirituality or a satanic spirituality, which appear in different ways. And you can look at my last lecture if you want to have those things described. Now in our age, the certainty and Christ's reliance in the principle of Christian initiation is guaranteed. I mean, gosh, as Christ even shows, the whole process completed in grace to Paul. Bang. Of course, we're not Paul. We must go through the process. Today's inspiration knowledge includes both realms of experience, unlike before Christ. Even today, the advice and stimulation of a teacher can be invaluable, but the experiences of learning and knowing are now undergone in free Christ dependence with the transcendent self, through the transcendent self. These two areas of cognition together bring about inspired knowledge today. In other words, the sphere of mourning and the sphere of comfort. Of course, the epistemic principle that we talk about, none of this is done in isolation. It's always only possible because of the church, because it exists and opens the space for people to even consider that it's possible to walk towards Christ. And so anyone going on this, doing the monastic-like practices, must recognize that, must go to church, of course. It only exists and is possible because of that. And as I said, and I've said many times, these are just different words for talking about this stuff for the more philosophically minded. That's who this stuff is for. On the road doing these practices, it's for a people of a particular vocation within the wider church, let's say. And so the reality of inspiration is expressed in the drama of the soul life and in changes in one's inner character and attitude. And you'll notice that, how amazing it is. Finally, the things that have plagued you, that plague everyone, that you think can't be gotten rid of. Or, well, again, the therapy culture tends to make us okay with these things, but these things that might have plagued you your whole life are released and dissolved through your own not your own efforts, through your collaborative efforts, through Christ's help, and also a very careful recognition against your own pride. Again, I should say and highly recommend the book Unseen Warfare, and be carefully considered, because pride, especially on people going through this process too, you've got to be very careful. Pride and inflation, even that, it's the most difficult sin to work against. And that sin, it gets us in our judgment of others, especially even Christians. We, in our judgment of other people. And we'll go into that actually. I'm not going to talk about that now. We get there, talking about what true judgment is when the future's added to it. A hint, mercy, but we'll see what that is metaphysically. And so these things are experienced in full consciousness only at a certain level of spiritual knowledge. These things are experienced by many on their path of destiny, sometimes consciously, but often unconsciously. So you'll experience mourning often. Often you'll experience it. People have gone through these things and been comforted by Christ and they not even recognize it's him. Often discernments and intuitions have come to people and haven't even known it's him. How many people do not know how they've been secretly helped and hinted to by the Lord? Many. How many don't know the comforting insight they are led to by the pain of that mourning is owed to the eye perceiving through the psychological body in the spiritual world. It's owed to Christ's sendings. Now, I should have put this up front, but the archetype of all this mourning we're talking about, the second Beatitude describes, is before Pentecost, the apostles deeply felt the inadequacy of their soul forces. The fact that they slept in Gethsemane, they betrayed the Lord, deserted him, denied him rather. In contrast to the risen one, after this experience between the ascension and Pentecost, they could gain the knowledge of the silence, the desolation, and the utter the gloom of utter isolation as mourners of humankind, innocent and redeemed. True understanding of value occurs in this process and occurs going through the mourning, going through the death of the first wine. The first wine must die. You must die before you can live. And they're the archetype of it. Imagine that. It's important to contemplate the deep sorrow of having the Lord crucified. But that is truly required for a true understanding of what true value is. The values of the transvaluated will to power that has happened in modernity have to be dissolved. The absence of the false life, can we recognize that the life is actually, even the first wine provided to us by God, and we squandered it and misused it and were provoked. That sorrow is a requirement for truth and revelation. Joy and sorrow are deepened. This is life. The Lord is a synthesis of life and death, like I've said, but it's so important to recognize that transvaluation that is supposed to happen is a healing of your deeper inner being. Even Jung talks about this transvaluation that he calls individuation, but it's the Lord working in the depths of your being. First purifying with his waters that leak out of his side when he's stabbed, his purifying waters first, then his blood can be granted. You have to be dissolved first. You have to go through the first beatitude. You have to be empty. You have to mourn that emptiness. In that emptiness. Can you see how the true luster of what is true can't truly be experienced if you have these other understandings of value in the way? They have to be removed. And then in that empty being, do we see what that is, what the evil really is? See the truth of the false value in the emptiness and need, and then can compare it properly. It has to happen to see. It's not a matter of just, oh, by the way, here you go, here's the new forces, which is what a lot of fake Christianity is. It's sort of like, oh, here's the cheery Christianity. You have to die. You have to do your part of it to get out, to withdraw before the second wine can be given. Recognition of the truth of the old and the new Adam grew in the disciples. Recognition of the mystery of Golgotha as the act that ended the destiny of the old Adam and began the new. We realize the feelings of the old wine, the will to power. In this process, it must be removed to see it. It must be transvaluated. We must deeply thirst and be offered vinegar on a sponge to see the truth of the failings of the first wine. Vinegar is old wine. It's like the temptation of being offered the kingdoms of the world is similar to the being offered the vinegar on the sponge. Get yourself down off this cross is the temptation again of the will to power. It's the will to power tainted vitalism and worldly desire. The first wine, like I said, must be transvaluated through poverty. But I hope through that maybe you get a sense of why. You have to be without to see the difference, to discern. Not just because it's a distraction, it's part of the transvaluation. But anyway, let's move on. Blessed are those who suffer and find their way to Christ, for they can be filled with the new truth, experience comfort for all their suffering. Okay. Long lecture today. Maybe we'll only get halfway and we can continue the rest next time. All right. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Imagination. The inner perception of the vital body described in the previous section is possible only when preceded by a state of stillness and silence in the psychological body. Concentration without effort in prayer. Practice on this path has the primary purpose of gaining mastery over the inner movements of the psychological body. meaning all the temptations that rise up. Where do they rise up from? The psychological unconscious. The thoughts that come to you are not always you. But through this process of becoming meek, we gain the possibility of directing them, of stopping them and resisting them. Through the Christian path we do. This occurs not alone, but always in collaboration with the Lord who brings about the silence. It will then be able to perceive the vital bodies and the movements after that's done. As spiritual touch, as movement, as we've talked about in previous lectures. Another sense across the whole body. The acquiring the capacity to determine the psychological body's movements from consciousness from the eye is a prerequisite for suspending its impulses. The psychological body was corrupted in the fall and is primarily where temptations come from. The strongest impulse of the psychological body involves everything related to anger, will to power, wanting to retaliate, reactiveness from egoistic wounding. That's very connected with pride, right? And who's the chief of pride? Lucifer. In fact, the force of those impulses in the psychological body is so strong that we may consider control or lack of control of such impulses a measure of the control one has over the psychological body as a whole. Those who have the inner force to overcome the presence of anger or the force to evoke anger, even when no personal cause exists, and one would prefer to be in a comfortable calm, have the necessary force to control the whole psychological body. The controller of anger is the hanged man. He's cut off from all the trees next to him. He's cut off from the archetypes, like we talked about before. He's cut off from that stuff because Christ purified him. He's now led by celestial gravity, not the temporal provokings of modernity. The demons of the unconscious, he's not controlled by. He's pulled by celestial gravity. He's pulled by, through this process, it's a transition from the pull of the world, through withdraw from it. We become to be able to be connected with a different impulsion. Once we silence the distractions of the other many impulsions that come from the unconscious, do we be able to sense deeply, deep down, the more subtle impulsions from Christ that we may not have noticed before? That is what meek means, to be cut off from those impulses. But also, again, the zodiac kind of maps those archetypes. That is the pagan world that's cut off. Those dark influences are cut off when Christ comes. But you still, that's macrocosmically, he redeems it, but it still has to be done in the microcosm because you have to redeem your sin. So we still have to become meek in collaboration with Christ. We still have our part to play as individuals. So the third beatitude, Jesus Christ refers to those who are able to control the psychological body, with things granted from him, though, as the meek. It's helpful to think about meekness as being crucified as well, as obedience to solar law, as obedience to revelation, as becoming the transformed man, as the quelling of pride. Because that's what happens. To become meek is to be crucified, is to have, because the appendages, you have arms because of a will to grasp at the expense of others. You have legs because of a will to advance at the expense of others and hold on to the position. Left and right arm, left and right leg. You have a head because of a will to the brain, the will to greatness, the will to power, and they all need to be converted to will to service. That means being nailed to revelation, being nailed to revelation as it's come down, to the Ten Commandments, to poverty, obedience, chastity, and the practices related to them. That's what meekness is. not what Peterson's talking about. You know, there's some insight in that, but it's a pragmatism. No, it's a complete transformation of the being that you are until the currents of the will, because your will becomes a will to service of not yourself, which makes existence presence as it does to you, but fundamentally changes because it becomes a will over time through his help, through collaboration, through the miracle of faith granted to you. It becomes wings. The wings are granted to you. The wings are the wings of will, of service, and will reaches up, and then his wings reach down, hands reach down. That's what it is. And so the meek state is your head is upside down towards the divine. And people will look at you and they'll say, oh, he's acting stupid. Oh, he's a fool. That's the point of a fool for Christ. You're hanging upside down, following divine will, not doing the things perhaps that the normal, calculative Farsi would do. And how many people are Farsis without realizing it? But actually and carefully following divine will, which might on the outside at times look like the fool. Again, carefully, clearly, with clarity. Mysticism is the four parts of what's YHVH. It involves its Hermetic philosophy, but it's connected through mysticism and knowing, gnosis, and magic, these different senses, miraculous sense. All those things connected together, as I describe in the lecture, the epistemic principle. Also using the rules of truth criterion of idealism and realism, consilience, constructive fruitfulness, the intrinsic value of spiritual experience. All these things collaborate together to determine the truth of spiritual experience. And so the mysticism we're talking about is clear. And as we'll discover later, which we might get to in a second lecture, which we'll do straight next week because we have all the preparation done, but Christ enters the intellect too. It's not just the will and feeling. Christ enters Christ's thought. But that thought is not woolly in any way. It's clear, has clarity and exactness. But ideas as they're supposed to be, with the way, truth, and life, not an attempt to have truth on its own. And so, back on this point though, the destiny of the psychological body, the karma, involves the fact that since the fall, it has actually been the bearer of the Luciferic element in human beings. That Lucifer's right next to you. It's part of you. The intellect is a big part of the intellect. It can be redeemed, though, through this process. The intellect itself can be redeemed, but most of the intellect is, in Greek times, all of it. It's Luciferic. That doesn't mean we don't work with it. Doesn't mean it can't be redeemed. We have to, so many things are satanic, but you have to interact with them, capital, all that stuff. It's about being governed by the divine, though, with the saving impulse into the world, not having your God accidentally be a Luciferic thing or a satanic thing, which most people follow, and I used to. It's a we. I'm always talking about we. So the purpose of this is to convert Luciferic impulse into meekness, egoistic impulse into meekness, egoistic empathy, egoistic sympathy, egoistic antipathy and hate, to become objective of all those things. You don't stop feeling, but they're no longer subjective based on a individual prejudice. It's overcoming prejudice for objective truth and objective value, this whole process. So because those impulses are converted over time, like I said, we begin to be able to receive and follow impulses and direction from outside creation and temporality, from the divine. and be chiefly motivated by Christ. Anger arises from the pride of opposing divine will, cosmic order, and overcoming it is the purpose of man. The I in its work on the psychological unconscious, and this work on the lower self, because you become an in-between. We must bear the cross of our lower selves and ennoble it, not abandon it like the Easterners. Ennoble it, not see like the Gnostics want to abandon the body. No, we're ennobling it, saving creation, because it's all to be resurrected. This is the first resurrection. Wait, hang on. Thus the meek, those that have brought this work to a certain degree of progress and perfection, are justifiably called the conquerors of Lucifer. This is the first resurrection of the psychological body, as I talked about in the last lecture, brought about through forgiveness, concentration without effort, and prayer, the 3 O's and their practices, and the practices related to. I mean, mainly the most important one is concentration without effort with prayer. But you have to do the rest of the Christian life as well. But it's also the practices that I've described many times before in other lectures. They're related to the oath of poverty, obedience, and chastity. And it's not that you never feel anger again, though. But at this stage of initiation, you are capable of resistance to whatever the psychological body, and you always feel it and you will fail, but you're capable of it. Because before, you're provoked by archetypes and don't even realize it your whole life. The desires don't always come from you. Most of the time they don't. But it makes you capable of resisting it. You'll face visual imagination on this path. The force of imagination, vision, is the force that gave courage to control and convert anger. Of course, I've already described earlier what to watch out for with dissolving the first wine of what is imagistic. Meek human beings are generally the most courageous, since those who carry no resentment against others, who've gone through the process of forgiveness, blessing others, are not afraid of anyone, because they're now following divine will. Thus it is in ordinary daily life, and even more so in the world of concrete spiritual work. The ability to bring one's psychological body to calm surrender depends absolutely upon whether one has the courage to look truth right in the face. It's easier said than done. You have to pray for it. You have to express your will to do it. You're willing to face the truth, because you won't be. You'll have these prejudices, even people's prejudices against Christ. It's really because you don't want to acknowledge your own. A lot of it is to do with we don't want to acknowledge our own sin. Can't be Christian. The truth, the presence of mind must be a powerfully developed force before we can go through the trial of courage. That's why you go through this it's a long process. You have to be accepting of that and just like I've talked about many times before, you just continue. This represents what is morally essential for training imagination. Of course, the imagination is connected to this psychological unconscious we're trying to deal with, right? So that's why it's dangerous. And I talked about in that dialogue I had with Malcolm Guide, is the imagination is also the enemy, right? And as the orthodoxy well knows. And that's why it's always considered a secondary thing. To bear the cosmic forces and the vision at the ground of low desire and will to power is what you have to go through to be like the disciples on the ship, being knocked around by these cosmic forces. That happens to you on this process. And what do you do when that happens? Say if you're woken up in a dream or whatever by these forces, pray the Lord's Prayer. Pray the Jesus Prayer. And the courage is granted to you to bear and overcome those things by Christ. Pray to him. He's always there. The trial of courage is overcome with prayer and Christ. This trial through which we honestly wish for and are able to endure it is the trial which we honestly wish for and are able to endure, seeing the unvarnished truth about ourselves as it looks. It can be frightening. The monster. And about others. This level of imagination is attained when we overcome impatience, anger, and intolerance, when we can sit and dwell and pray and concentrate, when we develop the necessary courage of faith to endure the truth. You also need faith to just sit there and do it. But even the great monastics and great saints are all telling you that this stuff will happen. And initiates, if you just put the time in. It's worth it to follow him. You'll realize that over time. The vision of imagination is established as the result of a force of concentration greater than that required by ordinary sensory objective consciousness, the modern worldview. So it becomes possible over time. Again, it's not essence, it's not uncreated, at that point, it's not created uncreated energies. Those come later. And as I talk about the different things that are experienced in the lecture on that, on the epistemic principle, the truth of spiritual experience, how to recognize it, and how to see this imagination as secondary, just as a flag post that things are happening during concentration and prayer. So, yeah, got to be wary of it. The warnings are wise, but yeah, that's what the epistemic principle is for. And so the vision of imagination, I think I already said that. Such an enhanced faculty of concentration has the moral background of calm courage, possessed by a soul that has become meek. Nothing helps more with this than moral development. A clean conscience leads to concentration, not ADHD medication. What human souls, because you're not haunted, right? You're not haunted by other things breaking in because you have a clean conscience. That's why the monastics are the masters of concentration. That's why the saints are the masters of concentration and contemplation. What human souls experience in this trial might, if the force of courage is lacking, both plunge them into despair about themselves and arouse resentment towards human nature, which we also talked about in the last lecture. But this is the very point, not to lose confidence. But this is the very point, not to lose confidence in oneself and in humankind. The trial of fire, the trial of courage is the trial of faith. Through it, faith in humanity must not only be preserved, but also strengthened despite and because of the disillusionment in the fire of knowledge and understanding of sin. And what really provokes and drives people, because it can lead you to think about everyone else as, oh, look at the low, look at these despicable, whatever, these low wretches. Look where I am. No. You're only ever, no matter what you do, you're just a son, like everyone else. You're just a son. And we should, it's enormous gratitude for all the gifts that are given by him and provided by him, not us. All the forces. And to be able to even just participate in a small way in the Lord's mission, even just to have a small purpose, to be able to know divine will is the greatest gift. You can have a purpose. And to know it's not a purpose arbitrarily assigned, but having done the work to disclose divine will and know it with certainty to be true, that it's not assigned by you. And so it's possible. But you must recognize too is that you can't abandon everyone. There's a sense that you go, like I've talked about this before, this temptation where you say or think, oh, thank God, at least I know now. I've gone through this process. That's a temptation. It's not for you. It's for helping other people. It's all for saving. Everyone who goes through this process, it must be about helping other people. Or else you end up like there's an issue with the Rosicrucians where that happened. Everyone else was a wretch, even though they had purified themselves. No, you're just a son. And You have to have faith. Christ has endless faith in humanity. And your faith in humanity and faith in general is tested through this trial. It is the Christian truth learned in the school of imagination. Christianity is not only confidence in God, but also in humanity, that they have the image of God in them. That's what that means, is that the Lord is at the ground of all of their being. So even the biggest sinners, they all have that. That's what mercy's about. But that mercy isn't just toxic empathy. We've got to avoid toxic empathy at all cost, because that's egoistic in a different way. Communism, that's ego. It's the idea of that has no contact with the future. That has no contact with true mercy. Is including in your judgment consultation with the Lord, who is the future. He knows someone's potential, right? And so you not only is it episteme, where you have an intuition from the past and present of the whole truth, with also your logical conclusions and a collection of all the facts, a dianoia, a doxa, but it is also, it's episteme and theurgy. It's episteme and it's mercy and harmony. It's righteousness and harmony, which later we go into. It's righteousness and mercy. It's past, present, and future, not just past and present, like Plato's righteousness talks about. And so Christ is the one being in the world who completely trusts humankind. The measure of Christ's confidence in humanity is expressed in the promise he left us: I am with you always, even until the end of the world. It tells us that his confidence in us will not be withdrawn while the world and time endure. And the appropriate response to this confidence is found in the words of St. Paul: I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. These words are the true form of human confidence in Christ. And so as we come to the end of the first three Beatitudes, which I think we will end this lecture, and that's good actually, because it gives me another lecture for the next week and perhaps even the week after. I think it's probably coming to the halfway, but the first three Beatitudes are a training. Like, it could be considered a training that has to happen. The middle three are to be considered the transformation that occurs of the soul through that training. The last three are the changes in world destiny that the blessed lead to. And so the first three Beatitudes tell us about the various conditions and trials that the whole human being must pass through before attaining the three stages of reconnection with the Christ and his impulses: to be meek, to mourn, and be comforted. Inspiration. To have the kingdom of heaven. Through poverty and emptiness. The first Beatitude. Thus, we can view the first three Beatitudes as ways of Christian initiation, as things that sum up different parts of it. The essence of initiation knowledge is that it's both inwardly subjective and outwardly objective. When you're purified, you become objective in this process. When your conscience becomes objective through your nailing yourself to the cross, to revelations, laws, the 10 Commandments, the practices of poverty, obedience, and chastity. It comprises both aspects from a cosmic perspective. You become objective, like I'm saying. This is especially clear in this passage: blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. When you're meek, Christ is with you. It's his impulsions that strengthen you and govern you. Even though you are still tempted by the world, he grants you the powers to be able to deal with it. But you constantly do pray for help, of course. But, and you fail, you still experience anger, but little by little, you move towards perfection. We move towards him at one-ment. Where an inward soul condition is brought together with a future cosmic fact. What will happen for us now on the Christian path of those who truly put the time and effort in to do it and put the 1/7 of their time in to do it. What happens for us now with the kingdom of heaven coming to, which happens for the monastics and the saints, has to happen with everyone in the far future. So that's why the saints have these faculties. That's why the monastics have these faculties, because they reconnect to faculties that existed before the fall, to the old Adam. Before we took and were exchanged with the low faculties, like I talk about in the lecture, the essence of tradition, the faculties that replace these things were given by the serpent. They're his exchange. The senses are his exchange. The intellect is his exchange for what we used to have, the Lord. So, one of the first three, when we're talking about the trial of fire, the test of faith through experience, is the third beatitude, meekness, just as the trial of water. And this is to do with, connected to esotericism, when it's called trial by water, Christian esotericism. Those names aren't so important. It's more the other stuff. But so the trial of water is a test of hope through mourning and comfort, the second beatitude, and the trial of air tests the capacity to love, the first beatitude, poor in spirit. The force of confidence is strengthened through the trial of fire. The force of hope in mourning leads to the comfort of inspiration knowledge. And the force of love is born in intuition, in the trial of air, the first beatitude, in the emptiness and approaching the 0 point. This is how the three forces of Christ are revealed to imagination, inspiration, and intuition. Or should I say three forces? Because it's not all of them. But, yeah, I think that's where we'll leave it for today. And that's good because it gives us more content to do a lecture on next week. I'll probably do it in a week's time. I think we'll get past just the middle Beatitudes there. But I think we've already gone for several hours already. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them through. A lot of that is some difficult stuff. But remember, it's to do with helping people that are on this path, people of this vocation. But anyway, let's have a look. Have a look. On this path, people of this vocation. Fascinating angle to examine the eternal truths and gifts of God. Truly a blessed insight. Thanks, Chris. I sadly must head out, but I shall rewatch when able. The Lord's blessings be upon you, Scott. Thank you very much for that. David Stig. Okay, I'm still here. Hello, David. That's the only death. I can't remember what that's a response. I don't know what that's a response to, but thank you for commenting. All right, everyone. Those who are awake and fellowship members will head over for a conversation on what we have described today in the Discord. If you wanted to join up and become a part of the fellowship to engage with these practices and what I'm describing, go to scottmanion.com/fellowship. And yeah, it's very rewarding. I won't try to sell you on it or anything like that, but I'll see you guys all over in the Discord. God bless you all.